The champagne in my glass was warm. But the smile on my face was frozen solid. I stood on the very edge of the rented villa's private dining room, watching my own family perform a play I wasn't cast in. My brother, Martin, was holding court in the center, looking every inch the Silicon Valley visionary he claimed to be. My parents, Robert and Susan, were beaming at him like he had just invented fire. To Martin, my father shouted, raising his glass. To the launch of the app that's going to change everything. The guests cheered. Crystal clinked. And then came the moment that made the air leave my lungs. My mother stepped forward with a large, elegantly wrapped box. She handed it to Martin with a look of pure adoration. "We know you have worked so hard, sweetie," she said, her voice trembling with pride. "You deserve a reward that matches your ambition." Martin tore into the paper. He pulled out a set of keys. Not just any keys. Keys with the gold and black Porsche crest. The room erupted. My father clapped him on the back. "A vintage 911. Dad announced to the room. "Restored. $145,000. Because a CEO needs to look the part." I stood there, feeling the blood drain from my face. $145,000. That morning, I had eaten instant noodles for breakfast because I was trying to save every penny. I watched Martin hug them, laughing, spinning the keys on his finger. They hadn't just bought him a car. They had publicly erased my entire existence to fund his lie. Drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever felt like the invisible wallet in your family? The one who pays for everything but gets credit for nothing? Tell me I'm not the only one watching this. I stepped out onto the balcony, needing the cool Palo Alto air to settle the nausea curling in my stomach. Below me, Martin was leaning against the vintage Porsche, posing for photos with a glass of champagne in hand. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. But I knew the source code running this simulation. My family operated like a corrupt software architecture. Martin was the user interface. Flashy. Expensive. Designed to demand all the user's attention. I was the back end. Invisible. Essential. Buried in the dark. Keeping the system from crashing, while the UI took all the credit. Martin called himself a visionary. A founder. In reality, he hadn't written a functional line of code since he flunked his sophomore year. He didn't build apps, he built narratives. And my parents were his angel investors. Except they weren't using their own capital. They were using mine. I took a sip of water, trying to wash away the metallic taste of anxiety that had been sitting on my tongue for years. For 5 years, I had been the silent server farm powering their delusions. I worked 80-hour weeks as a senior cybersecurity analyst to make sure the family network stayed online. I paid off the mortgage on my parents' house 2 years ago so they could focus their resources on Martin's genius. I paid Martin's rent, in San Francisco, $4,000 a month for a studio apartment he claimed was essential for networking. I paid for the dinners, the flights, the emergency cash infusions when his crypto investments tanked. I did it because I had a secret. A firewall I had built to protect my own sanity. I had been saving, dollar by dollar, in a separate high-yield account, $250,000. It was my exit strategy, my down payment on a small, quiet house, where I wouldn't have to be the ATM anymore. I watched my father light a cigar. The thick, sweet smoke drifting up to where I stood in the shadows. He looked so proud. He had never looked at me like that. Not when I graduated top of my class. Not when I landed the job at the firm. And that's when the glitch in my own logic finally became clear. For years, I had convinced myself that this was just how families worked. That loyalty meant sacrifice. I had fallen into the trap of normalized cruelty. When you grow up being told your value is conditional, you start to view love as a subscription service. You think if you just keep paying the monthly fee, if you just cover one more bill, fix one more mess, buy one more gift, eventually, you'll unlock the premium tier where they actually care about you. But standing there, watching my brother laugh beside a car worth more than my entire education, I realized the truth. There was no premium tier. My subscription had been canceled years ago. They just forgot to tell me to stop paying. This wasn't a family. It was a Ponzi scheme. And I was the only investor left to swindle. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my glass of champagne at the happy family. I turned on my heel and walked calmly into the guest bathroom on the first floor. I engaged the heavy brass lock, creating a physical firewall between me and the celebration outside. The bathroom was marble and gold, smelling of expensive lilies. I sat on the closed lid of the toilet and opened my laptop. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady. Precision tools. I wasn't a daughter in that moment. I was a senior analyst, responding to a security breach. I logged into the Credit Monitoring Bureau. I needed to see the logs. If my parents had bought a car worth $145,000, they needed credit. And I knew for a fact their credit score was hovering somewhere in the low 500s. A mess of maxed out cards and missed payments that I usually cleaned up. The page loaded. And there it was. A hard inquiry from Porsche Financial Services. Dated 3 days ago. The loan status was approved. But the primary borrower wasn't my father. It wasn't my mother. And it certainly wasn't Martin, whose credit history was non-existent. The name on the loan was mine. I stared at the screen. The numbers were black and white. Cold and factual. $145,000. Secured against my social security number. Co-signed by Robert and Susan as guarantors using the power of attorney paperwork I had signed 5 years ago for a medical emergency and never revoked. They hadn't bought him a car. They had stolen my identity to lease a lifestyle they couldn't afford. They had leveraged my perfect credit rating, the one I had built with obsessive discipline for a decade, to buy a toy for their golden child. I closed my eyes for a second. I waited for the heartbreak. I waited for the tears of a betrayed daughter. But they didn't come. Instead, a different program executed in my mind. Clarity. This wasn't a family dispute. This was a felony. This was financial fraud. And in my line of work, you don't negotiate with hackers. You neutralize them. I opened 3 new tabs. First, I logged into the joint checking account, the one I deposited $2,000 into every month to cover their mortgage and bills. I initiated an immediate transfer, draining the balance back into my personal, secure account. Then, I removed my external funding source. The automatic transfer scheduled for the first of the month was canceled. Second, I went back to the credit bureau. I clicked the red button marked Dispute. I flagged the Porsche loan as fraudulent activity. I uploaded a quick affidavit stating I was not present for the signing and did not authorize the transaction. I froze my credit across all 3 major bureaus. Third, I called the fraud department of the bank financing the car. It was a Saturday. But the automated system allowed me to flag the account for identity theft. The dealership would get the notification within the hour. The financing would be revoked before the party was even over. I looked at the progress bar as the reports submitted. One by one, the green checkmarks appeared. Transaction denied. Account frozen. Fraud alert active. I stood up and looked in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were dead calm. I smoothed my dress. I wasn't just cutting them off. I was initiating a total system lockout. They wanted to play pretend with my money. Fine. Let's see how long the simulation lasts when I pull the plug on the server. I unlocked the bathroom door and walked back out into the party. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The notification was already on its way. The fallout didn't hit immediately. Like a virus planted in a server. It took 48 hours to propagate through the system. I spent Sunday in silence. My phone turned off. Sitting in my apartment with the blinds drawn. I wasn't hiding. I was rebooting. Monday morning. I went to work. My office at the firm was my sanctuary. A place where rules mattered. Where logic dictated outcomes. And where nobody could steal my credentials without triggering a firewall. I was deep in a code audit when my personal phone, which I'd left face up on my desk, began to vibrate. It wasn't a call. It was a notification flood. A distributed denial of service attack on my peace of mind. Mom calling. Dad calling. Martin calling. Mom calling. I picked up on the fifth ring. I didn't say hello. I just pressed the phone to my ear and waited. What did you do? My mother's voice wasn't just loud, it was hysterical. It was the sound of a woman watching her social standing evaporate. The dealership called us. Sloan. They called Martin while he was at the DMV. They said the financing was revoked for fraud. They threatened to report the car stolen if it wasn't returned within the hour. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the dual monitors in front of me. It was fraud. Mother. You forged my signature. We borrowed your credit. She screamed. That is what families do. We leverage our assets. We were going to refinance it in 6 months, once the app took off. You know Martin doesn't have the history for that kind of loan. We needed your score. You didn't ask. I said. My voice flat. You stole. We didn't steal. My father's voice boomed through the speakerphone. He must have snatched the phone from her. We optimized. You have a steady job? Sloan. You have a paycheck? You can absorb the debt ratio. Martin needs this car for his image. Do you understand how this industry works? Investors buy the image? Not the code. He was standing in line at the DMV, ready to register his plates. And the clerk told him the VIN was flagged. In front of everyone. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is for a CEO? I closed my eyes, letting the toxicity wash over me. They weren't calling to apologize. They weren't calling to ask if I was okay after realizing my own parents had committed a felony against me. They were calling because I had embarrassed their golden boy. This was financial infidelity. It was a betrayal so specific and so deep that it redefined our entire relationship. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as a resource. I was a server rack. I was bandwidth. I was something to be used until I overheated. And then replaced. You ruined his launch week. My mother sobbed in the background. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous that he has the spark and you're just the help. The help. That word severed the last cable holding me to them. I'm not the help. I said, my voice dropping an octave. Cold and precise. I'm the bank. And the bank is closed. The accounts are frozen. Dad, the transfers are canceled. And the fraud alert on my social security number, that's permanent. You won't be opening a library card in my name, let alone buying a luxury car. You ungrateful little... My father started. The dealership said you have an hour. I interrupted, checking the time on my screen. You've wasted 5 minutes screaming at me. I suggest you start driving. It would be a shame if Martin got arrested for grand theft auto on top of everything else. I hung up. I didn't block the number. I wanted to see the logs. I wanted a record of every desperate attempt they made to reconnect to the host they had bled dry. My hands were shaking. Just a little. But then I looked at my monitors. Green lines of code scrolling perfectly. Systems secure. Perimeter holding. I took a breath. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt lighter. Tuesday morning. The summons came. An encrypted calendar invite from the top floor. Urgent IP review. Sterling. Mr. Sterling was the chief technology officer of the conglomerate I protected. He was a legend in the valley. A man who ate unicorns for breakfast and could spot vaporware from a mile away. I smoothed my blazer and took the elevator up. Assuming there was a breach I hadn't caught, I walked into his glass-walled office. Sterling didn't look up from his tablet. "Sloan," he said, his voice gravelly. "You're the best analyst I've got. You know our architecture better than I do." "Thank you, sir. So tell me." He spun the tablet around to face me. "Why am I looking at a pitch deck from a kid named Martin, claiming he wrote the kernel for our new encryption protocol?" My heart stopped beating. I looked at the screen. There was Martin's face. Airbrushed and confident. Under the logo, Vanguard Innovations. And there, in the technical addendum, were lines of code. My code. It wasn't just similar. It was a direct copy-paste of a side project I had built 3 years ago. A predictive security model I had stored on a shared family server because I was trying to teach Martin how to code. I had given him read-only access, hoping he'd learn something. Instead, he had copied the repository and pitched it as his own proprietary genius. He calls it the Martin Protocol, Sterling said, raising an eyebrow. He's asking for a $2 million valuation based on this IP. He says he's a prodigy. I stared at the code. The indentation style was mine. The variable naming convention was mine. There was even a comment line I'd left in, "Fix this later. Coffee needed." He didn't write this, I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I did. That's my graduate thesis work. Mr. Sterling." He scraped my hard drive. Sterling leaned back, his eyes narrowing. I had a feeling. The kid talks in buzzwords. But he couldn't explain the logic flow when I pressed him. He's vaporware. Sloan. I left the office with my head spinning. Martin hadn't just stolen my credit score, he had stolen my intellectual property. He was trying to sell my own mind back to my boss. But the malware ran deeper than I thought. I rushed back to my desk and logged into the family trust. The emergency savings account I had set up. The one with the $250,000 I had scraped together for my house. The one my parents had emergency trustee access to. In case something happened to me. I typed in the password. The dashboard loaded. Balance, $14.52. I blinked, waiting for the glitch to correct itself. It didn't. I pulled the transaction history. Wire transfer, $250,000. Recipient Vanguard Innovations LLC. Memo seed round funding. The room started to spin. I grabbed the edge of my desk to keep from falling. They hadn't just stolen my identity for a car. They had looted my life savings to pretend Martin had investors. That seed funding Martin bragged about on LinkedIn, that wasn't venture capital. That was my down payment. That was 5 years of overtime. That was my freedom. They took my house to build his stage set. I pulled up the wire transfer document. My mother's digital signature was on the authorization line. Emergency withdrawal for family crisis. The note said, "A family crisis." Martin needing to look rich was a crisis. Me needing a home was an irrelevance. I closed the laptop. The grief I expected to feel was gone. Incinerated by a rage so pure, it felt like a system purge. They had stripped me for parts. They had taken my name, my money, and my work. And they had handed it all to the golden boy to play dress up. My phone buzzed. A text from Martin. Sterling loved the pitch. We're eating dinner tonight to close the deal. Don't ruin this for me. Sloan. Dad says you're being hysterical about the car. Grow up. I looked at the message. Then I looked at Mr. Sterling's office. I wasn't going to ruin it. I was going to nuke it from orbit. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the Forensic Accounting Division. This is Sloan. I said, I'd like to report a case of corporate espionage and grand larceny. I have the evidence. And I know where the suspect will be having dinner tonight. The restaurant was one of those places that didn't put prices on the menu. Dimly lit. Smelling of truffle oil and exclusivity. I walked past the host stand without slowing down. I knew exactly where table 4 was. Martin was sitting with his back to the door. His hands animated as he talked to Mr. Sterling. My parents were there, too. Nodding along like bobbleheads. Laughing too hard at Sterling's polite comments. The Porsche was valet parked outside. A gleaming metal lie waiting for the tow truck I had scheduled for 8:15 p.m. I stopped at the edge of the table. I didn't say hello. I dropped a 3-inch binder onto the white tablecloth. It landed with a heavy final thud that silenced the entire room. Martin jumped. When he saw me, his face twisted into a sneer. Sloan, what are you doing here? You're embarrassing yourself. Go home. I'm not here for you. I said, my voice steady. I turned to Mr. Sterling. Sir, you asked for a due diligence report on Vanguard Innovations. I finished it early. Sterling looked from me to the binder. Then to Martin. Sloan, you can't be here, my father hissed, half rising from his chair. Security, my daughter is having a breakdown. Sit down. Robert, Sterling said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a man who controlled billion-dollar budgets. My father sat. Sterling opened the binder. Tab 1. I said, reciting the data I had memorized. Credit report. The $145,000 asset Martin claims as company property, it's financed under my identity. I filed the police report for fraud this afternoon. The vehicle is currently being repossessed. Martin laughed. A nervous, high-pitched sound. She's jealous. Mr. Sterling, it's a family dispute. The financing is complicated. Tab 2. I continued, ignoring him. Seed capital. Martin claims to have secured a $250,000 angel investment. That wire transfer came from a family trust account. My account. The signature authorizing the transfer was forged. That money was for a house. It is now evidence in a grand larceny investigation. My mother let out a small, strangled sob. She reached for Martin's hand. But he pulled away. He was staring at the binder like it was a bomb. And tab 3. I said, leaning in close. The intellectual property. The Martin protocol. If you check the metadata on the source code, sir, you'll see the original creation dates. 3 years ago. User author Sloan admin. He didn't write the code. He scraped it from a shared drive I forgot to password protect. Sterling flipped to the back of the binder. He looked at the timestamps. He looked at the code comparison. Then he closed the binder and pushed his chair back. This meeting is over, Sterling said. Standing up? Martin, don't contact my office again. If you try to sell this code elsewhere, our legal team will bury you. Wait. Martin scrambled up, knocking over his wine glass. A dark stain spread across the tablecloth, bleeding into the white fabric. It's just a draft, I can explain. She's lying, she's just the help. Sterling paused. He looked at Martin with cold pity. She's not the help. Son, she's the architect. You're just the error message. Sterling walked out, and in the silence he left behind, I watched my brother disintegrate. It was fascinating. In a clinical way, I was witnessing the delusion of the empty wallet in real time. For his entire life, Martin had believed his own hype. He thought he was charismatic. He thought he was a leader. He thought he commanded respect. But he never realized that his personality was a subscription service paid for by me. His confidence, rented with my credit. His vision, stolen from my hard drive. His swagger, fueled by my savings. Now that I had cut the funding, the man simply evaporated. He wasn't a tortured genius facing adversity. He was a paper tiger, standing in a wet stain of expensive wine. Without my money to prop him up. He had no spine. No character. And no name. He looked at me. His eyes wide and terrified. Like a child who had lost his mother in a supermarket. Sloan, he whispered. Fix this. I picked up the binder. I just did. The legal system runs much slower than a line of code. But the output is just as binary. Guilty or not guilty. Solvency or bankruptcy. Martin took a plea deal. Faced with the mountain of evidence I provided. The IP theft. The wire fraud. The identity theft. His lawyer advised him that a jury would likely give him 10 years. He took 3 years in a minimum security facility for wire fraud. It was the first time in his life he had to face a consequence I couldn't pay to make go away. My parents fared worse. They didn't go to prison. But they lost the one thing they valued more than their own children, their status. The court ordered full restitution for the $250,000 they stole. To pay it, they had to sell the house. The house I had paid off. The house they had leveraged to destroy me. I didn't go to the auction. I didn't need to see the for sale sign to know that the architecture of their lives had collapsed. Without my server running in the background. Their lifestyle was just a 404 error resource, not found. I changed my phone number the day the verdict came in. I didn't want their apologies. And I certainly didn't want their blame. I blocked their emails. I filtered their names out of my social media feeds. I initiated a total system purge. 6 months later, I stood on a stage in San Francisco. The lighting was bright, warm, and focused entirely on me. I wasn't there as Martin's sister or Robert and Susan's daughter. I was there as the keynote speaker for the Global Cybersecurity Summit. Please welcome. The announcer's voice boomed. The architect of modern security. I walked out to applause that I had earned. Every clap was for code I wrote. For strategies I built. For a reputation I secured with my own 2 hands. That night, I drove home. Not to a rented apartment. And not to a house co-signed by thieves. I drove to a small, mid-century modern home in the hills. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have a wine cellar or a 3-car garage. But when I unlocked the front door, the silence that greeted me wasn't lonely. It was secure. I sat on my couch, opened my banking app, and looked at the balance. It was recovering. But more importantly, it was mine. No shared access. No emergency trustees. Just me and my hard work. Protected by the strongest firewalls money could buy. I realized then that I had spent my 20s trying to patch a system that was fundamentally broken. I thought if I just optimized the output, if I gave more, worked harder, fixed more bugs, my family would finally function. But you can't fix code that is malicious by design. I learned that you can't debug a family that is programmed to destroy you. Sometimes, you have to shut down the system to save yourself. If you've ever had to be the villain to protect your peace, share your story below. I'm reading every single one.